Ambassador Kethril stood at the viewing window of the diplomatic vessel, watching the blue and green planet grow larger as they approached. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep thought among his people, the Velkhari. For 300 cycles, his species had made first contact with other intelligent life forms across the galaxy. They had developed protocols, careful methods that had been tested and refined through hundreds of encounters. Never once had those protocols failed them. "Ship Commander Tethmer," Kethril said, his voice calm and measured, "what do our scans tell us about this species?" The commander moved to stand beside the ambassador, her silver scales catching the light from distant stars. "They call themselves humans, Ambassador. Our long-range observations have been most interesting. They appear to be a young species, barely achieving space travel in the last few of their generations. And their technological level? Primitive compared to our own. Their weapons systems are basic chemical propulsion and simple nuclear devices. Their ships are slow and require large crews. By our standards, they would be classified as a Type 2 developing civilization." Kethril made a soft humming sound, the Velkhari equivalent of a nod. Everything seemed normal. The protocols were clear for dealing with Type 2 civilizations. Approach slowly, make peaceful contact, establish trade relations, and eventually guide them toward joining the Galactic Council. It was a process they had completed hundreds of times before. "Prepare the contact team," Kethril ordered. "We will follow Standard Protocol 7, peaceful approach, gifts of advanced technology, and an invitation to join the greater galactic community." As the diplomatic ship moved closer to the human home system, Kethril reviewed the cultural data his scouts had gathered. Humans were a curious species. They had many nations and governments, which was unusual but not unheard of. They had a history of conflict among themselves, which was more common among young species. What caught his attention was something in their art and stories. "Commander, these entertainment broadcasts we intercepted, what do you make of them?" Tethmer tilted her head, examining the data on her display. "They appear to enjoy stories of conflict, Ambassador. Many of their popular entertainments involve combat, warfare, and struggle." "That is concerning. Do they have a warrior caste?" "Not exactly. Their military forces are made up of volunteers from their general population. Any human can become what they call a soldier." Kethril found this strange. In most civilizations, warfare was handled by specific genetic lines or manufactured combat units. The idea that any member of a species could choose to become a warrior was unusual, but he did not let this concern him greatly. The protocols had handled aggressive species before. The key was to approach with overwhelming technological superiority, making conflict unthinkable. The Velkhari ship entered the outer edges of the human solar system. As expected, the humans detected them quickly. Their primitive sensor arrays were actually quite sensitive, Kethril noted with mild surprise. Within hours, they received a transmission. "Unknown vessel, this is the United Earth Defense Force. Please identify yourself and state your intentions." The translation was rough but workable. Kethril composed his response carefully, following the standard greeting template that had worked for centuries. "People of Earth, we are the Velkhari, representatives of the Galactic Council. We come in peace, seeking friendship and trade. We wish to welcome you to the community of intelligent species that spans this galaxy." There was a long pause before the response came. "Velkhari vessel, please hold your position. We are dispatching a diplomatic team to meet you." Kethril was pleased. The humans were responding according to expected patterns. He waited patiently as a small human vessel approached. It was a crude thing, clearly designed for both transport and combat, with visible weapon mounts on its hull. Such dual-purpose design was inefficient but common among young species. The human ship requested permission to dock, and Kethril granted it. He gathered his contact team in the docking bay, arranging them according to Protocol 7 specifications. They stood in a semicircle, unarmed, with gifts displayed prominently. The gifts included advanced power cells, medical technology, and samples of rare materials. This approach had never failed to impress a Type 2 civilization. The airlock opened with a hiss of pressure equalization. The first humans Kethril had ever seen in person stepped through. There were 5 of them, and they immediately did something no other first contact species had ever done. They spread out. Kethril watched with growing confusion as the humans moved to form a loose pattern that covered multiple angles of the room. Their leader, identified by slightly different markings on his uniform, stepped forward. But even as he approached, his companions maintained their spread positions, and their eyes moved constantly, scanning the room. "I am Admiral Chen Wei of the United Earth Defense Force," the human said. His voice was calm, but Kethril noticed tension in his posture. "On behalf of Earth, I greet you. I am Ambassador Kethril of the Velkari. We welcome this historic first contact between our peoples." He gestured to the gifts. "We have brought offerings of friendship, advanced technology to help your species grow and prosper." The Admiral looked at the gifts but did not move toward them. "That's very generous. Before we proceed, may I ask about your intentions? You mentioned a Galactic Council. What exactly does membership involve?" This was where the protocol became important. Kethril had rehearsed this speech many times. The Galactic Council is an organization of peaceful species who have agreed to work together for mutual benefit. Younger species like your own are guided and protected as they develop. In exchange, member species contribute resources and eventually military units to the common defense. Military units, the Admiral's expression changed slightly. Defense against what? There are dangerous species in the galaxy. Raiders, conquerors, those who would take rather than trade. The Council maintains a unified fleet to protect all member worlds. The Admiral turned to one of his companions, a woman with short hair and alert eyes. They exchanged a look that Kethril could not interpret. Then the Admiral spoke again. "And what does this protection cost?" Kethril was surprised by the question. No species had ever asked about cost during a first contact meeting. They were usually too amazed by the advanced technology on display to think about such practical matters. Young species begin by contributing raw materials. As you develop, you would provide soldiers for the unified fleet. Our soldiers, under whose command? The Council's military structure is unified. All soldiers serve under Velkari commanders, as we have the most experience in galactic warfare. Another exchange of looks among the humans. Kethril began to feel that something was not going according to protocol, but he could not identify what was wrong. "Ambassador," the Admiral said slowly, "I think we need to have a much longer conversation before we discuss any kind of arrangement. Perhaps you could tell us more about these dangerous species you mentioned, and about the Council's military operations." "Of course. We have recorded histories and battle footage that we would be happy to share." Battle footage would be very informative. Kethril signaled his aide to prepare the historical archive. He still felt that something was different about this contact, but he could not say what. The humans had not refused the protocol. They had not acted with aggression or fear. They were simply asking questions that no species had thought to ask before. As the aide brought out the viewing equipment, Kethril noticed that the humans had not relaxed their formation. They still stood in that spread pattern, still watching everything. One of them, a large male with dark skin and many scars visible on his hands, was examining the walls of the ship with particular interest. "Is something wrong with your companions?" Kethril asked. "They seem uncomfortable." Admiral Chen smiled, and there was something in that expression that made Kethril's scales ripple with unease. "Not at all, Ambassador. They're just doing their job. Please, show us what you have. We're very interested in learning about this galaxy we're joining." The viewing screen activated, and the history of the Galactic Council began to play. Kethral watched the humans watching, and for the first time in his long career, he wondered if the protocols were going to be enough. The historical archive began with the founding of the Galactic Council, 5,000 cycles ago, when the Velkari first achieved faster-than-light travel. Images showed the great Velkari ships of that era, spreading across the galaxy and making contact with other species. The archive presented a story of peaceful expansion, of primitive species being lifted up and guided toward civilization. Kethral watched the humans as they absorbed this information. Admiral Chen's face remained neutral, but his eyes moved constantly, taking in every detail. The other humans did the same, and Kethral noticed they were occasionally making small hand signals to each other. The Velkari had no equivalent to this kind of silent communication. The archive moved to scenes of warfare. The first was against a species called the Krath, insected beings who had refused to join the Council and had attacked Council trading vessels. The footage showed Velkari warships devastating Krath cities from orbit, followed by ground forces moving through the ruins. The commentary explained that this was necessary to protect peaceful species from aggression. "How many Krath died in that war?" Admiral Chen asked. The question surprised Kethral. "I would have to check the exact records, but the Krath were not completely destroyed. A remnant population survives on their home world, now under Council supervision." "What percentage of their population survived?" Kethral checked his data device. "Approximately 12% of the pre-war population." The Admiral said nothing, but Kethral saw his jaw tighten. The humans exchanged more of those silent signals. The archive continued, showing war after war. The Temporal, a species of energy beings who had been forced into contained fields because they would not accept Council authority. The Morthak, a nomadic species whose fleets had been hunted to extinction when they refused to settle on designated worlds. The Gleth, whose bioengineered weapons had required the complete sterilization of 3 planets to contain. "Ambassador," Admiral Chen said when the archive reached its end, "these wars you've shown us, every one of them seems to have been against species who refused to join the Council willingly." "That is correct. Some species are too dangerous or too aggressive to be allowed to develop independently. The Council acts for the greater good of the galaxy." "And what happens to species who join willingly, but later decide to leave?" No species had ever asked this question either. Kethral had to think before answering. The Council has never faced that situation. Member species understand that the benefits of membership far outweigh any concerns. "But if they wanted to leave?" "I do not believe that would be permitted. The stability of the Council depends on unity." The Admiral turned to confer with his team. Kethral could hear them speaking in low voices, but the translator had trouble with their quick, informal speech. He caught fragments like strategic assessment and force projection and potential threat level. After several minutes, the Admiral turned back. His expression had changed. There was still no hostility in it, but there was something harder behind his eyes, a calculation that Kethral found deeply unsettling. "Ambassador, I need to send a detailed report back to my government before we continue these discussions. Would you permit me to transmit everything you've shown us?" "Of course. Sharing information is part of the contact protocol." The female human with short hair operated a device on her wrist. "Transmission complete, Admiral. High Command will have everything within the hour." "Good." The Admiral looked around the room once more. "Ambassador, while we wait for a response from Earth, perhaps you could tell us more about the Council's military capabilities. You mentioned that younger species contribute soldiers. How many soldiers does the Council have?" "The Unified Fleet includes approximately 2 billion military personnel from various member species." "And how many ships?" "Approximately 40,000 warships of various classes." The humans exchanged more signals. Kethril was growing increasingly uncomfortable with how much military information they were requesting, but the protocol required answering all questions honestly during first contact. Deception created poor foundations for long-term relationships. What about command structure? This question came from the large, scarred human who had been examining the walls. His voice was deeper than the Admiral's, and there was no softness in it at all. As I mentioned, all Council forces are under Velkhari command. We have the most experience and the most advanced tactical systems. And the other species just accept this. Kethril's scales rippled with discomfort again. The arrangement has proven effective. Other species provide the bulk of ground forces while Velkhari officers provide strategic leadership. So you use other species as your frontline soldiers, while your own people stay in command positions. The way the human said this made it sound like an accusation. Kethril felt the need to defend his people. The Velkhari have guided this galaxy toward peace for 5,000 cycles. Our experience is unmatched. I'm sure it is. The Admiral held up a hand, silencing his companion. Please forgive Colonel Rivers. He spent his career studying military history, and he tends to be direct. We're all just trying to understand how things work out here. Kethril accepted the explanation, but he noticed that the colonel did not look apologetic at all. The human continued to study every detail of the room with those hard, measuring eyes. A signal came from the human ship. Admiral Chen listened to something through a small device in his ear, and his expression became very still. Ambassador, my government has reviewed the information you provided. They have some concerns they would like to address before we proceed. What kind of concerns? They would like to know more about the process of joining the Council. Specifically, they would like to know what happens to a species that agrees to join, but then disagrees with Council policies. I explained that no species has ever wanted to leave. Yes, but what if they did? What if a member species developed technology that the Council didn't approve of, or refused to provide soldiers for a war they didn't agree with? These questions were far outside any protocol Kethril knew. He was trained to present the benefits of Council membership, not to discuss theoretical scenarios of resistance, but the humans clearly expected answers. The Council has systems in place to guide member species toward appropriate development paths. Species that show signs of instability or dangerous independence are given additional oversight. Additional oversight meaning military presence on their worlds, restrictions on certain technologies, in extreme cases, direct administration by Council officials. The Admiral turned to his team again. This time, their conversation was louder, and Kethril caught more words. Words like occupation and puppet states and sovereignty. He did not like the direction this contact was taking. Ambassador, the Admiral said finally, Earth is very grateful for your offer of friendship, but we have some concerns about the terms of Council membership that we'll need to discuss internally before we can proceed. This was unexpected. Most species were eager to join immediately, overwhelmed by the technological benefits and the promise of protection. Perhaps if I explain the advantages more clearly. We understand the advantages. We're just not sure we want to pay the price. Felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. Admiral Chen, I hope you understand that independent species in this galaxy face significant risks. The dangers I mentioned are quite real. We understand, but we've faced dangers before. Our species has survived some very difficult times. The Admiral's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath the calm. We would prefer to establish diplomatic relations with the Council without committing to full membership at this time. Is that possible? The protocol did not include this option. Species either joined or they became potential threats. There was no middle ground that Kethril knew of. I would need to consult with the Council itself on such an unusual request. We understand. Take whatever time you need. In the meantime, perhaps we could exchange more information. We would be happy to show you recordings of our own history, our culture, our military capabilities. The offer hung in the air. Kethril knew he should refuse, should stick to the established protocol. But something about these humans made him curious. And there was something in Admiral Chen's eyes that suggested the offer was more than just friendliness. It was a challenge. "Very well," Kethril said slowly. "Show us what humanity has to offer." The Admiral smiled again, and this time Kethril recognized the expression. It was the smile of someone who had just achieved exactly what they wanted. The Human Historical Archive was unlike anything Kethril had seen before. Where the Velkari history showed careful expansion and managed conflicts, the human history was chaos given form. Wars of staggering scale rolled across their small planet. Nations rose and fell. Empires conquered and crumbled. And through it all, the humans kept fighting. "This is your Second World War," Kethril said, watching footage of strange, primitive aircraft dropping explosives on cities. "How many of your species died in this conflict?" "Approximately 70 million, Admiral Chen replied. 70 million. Kethril did the calculation in his head. That was nearly 3% of the human population at the time, killed in a single war lasting only a few of their years. The Velkari had never sustained such losses in any conflict. And this was a war between different human groups. Yes, but we came together in the end. The nations that fought together against the common enemy formed the foundation of our current global cooperation." The archive continued. More wars, smaller but no less intense. Something called the Cold War, which Kethril learned was a conflict of preparation and threat rather than direct combat. And then the expansion into space, driven not by peaceful curiosity but by competition between rival nations. "You developed space travel as a weapon?" Kethril asked. "Not exactly, but the technology came from weapons research, yes. Our first rockets were designed to carry nuclear warheads. We learned to use them for exploration instead." The Velkari had developed space travel through careful scientific progress over thousands of cycles. The humans had done it in decades, driven by fear and competition. The efficiency was horrifying. Colonel Rivers spoke up again. "Ambassador, I notice that your people's history doesn't include any periods of sustained conflict among yourselves. The Velkari unified our home world very early in our development. We have not had internal conflicts for over 8,000 cycles." 8,000 cycles. The colonel shook his head slowly. "We've been unified for about 80 years, and we've already had 3 major internal conflicts that came close to nuclear war." "That sounds very dangerous." "It is. It's also made us very good at war." The admiral intervened again. "What the colonel is trying to say is that humanity has a complex relationship with conflict. We don't like war, but we've learned to be very effective at it when necessary." Kethril was beginning to understand something about these humans that troubled him deeply. The Council's protocols assumed that young species would either be peaceful and eager for protection, or aggressive and in need of conquest. The humans were neither. They were aggressive and peaceful at the same time, capable of terrible violence but also of cooperation. They did not fit any category Kethril knew. "I have a question," the female human said. Her name was Lieutenant Commander Okonkwo, Kethril had learned. "Your council has been making contact with new species for thousands of cycles. How many have said no to membership?" "Several dozen species have initially refused. Eventually, most came to understand the benefits and joined willingly." "And the ones who never joined willingly?" Kethril did not want to answer this question, but the protocol required honesty. "They were managed in various ways. Some were contained. Some were reduced in numbers. A few were eliminated entirely." "Eliminated," the word hung in the air. "You mean genocide?" I mean the removal of threats to galactic peace. The Council does not take such action lightly, but sometimes there is no other option. The humans were very quiet. Kethral could see them thinking, processing this information. He realized that he had made a mistake. The protocol assumed that species hearing about the Council's power would be intimidated into cooperation. These humans seemed to be having the opposite reaction. Admiral Chen spoke very carefully. "Ambassador, let me make sure I understand. Species that refuse to join the Council face potential destruction. Species that join give up control of their own military and development. And species that try to leave would presumably face the same consequences as species that refuse to join." That is an oversimplification, but broadly accurate. Then with respect, Ambassador, what you're describing isn't a council, it's an empire. The word hit Kethral like a physical blow. No species had ever described the council that way to his face. We prefer to think of it as a community of mutual protection and benefit. I'm sure you do. The Admiral stood, and his team moved with him, maintaining that spread formation that Kethral now recognized as a combat stance. These humans had not relaxed their guard for a moment during the entire meeting. Ambassador Kethral, I thank you for your honesty. It's helped us understand our situation very clearly. We need to return to Earth now to report to our government. I expect there will be further discussions. Of course, I will await further contact. The humans moved toward the airlock, but the Admiral paused at the threshold. Ambassador, a piece of advice from one species to another. When you meet with our government's official negotiators, I wouldn't mention the part about eliminating species that refuse to cooperate. They might take it personally. Then the humans were gone, and Kethral was left standing in the docking bay, surrounded by untouched gifts and a growing feeling of dread. He returned to his quarters and began composing his report to the Council. For the first time in his career, he did not know what to recommend. The standard protocol seemed inadequate, but he could not articulate why. Something about these humans had shaken his confidence in everything he had been taught. Commander Tethmer found him there hours later, still working on his report. Ambassador, the human vessel has returned to their planet. What are your orders? Kethral looked at his incomplete report. We wait, and we prepare for the possibility that our first contact protocols may need revision. Revision, but the protocols have worked for thousands of cycles. Yes, Kethral said quietly, but I do not think they have ever met a species like this one. The Council's response to Kethral's report was not what he expected. High Arbiter Velthon, the ancient leader of the Velkari diplomatic corps, contacted him personally through secure transmission. Ambassador Kethral, your report is highly irregular. You suggest that these humans may present unique challenges. Explain. Kethral chose his words carefully. High Arbiter, the humans asked questions that no species has asked before. They challenged the fundamental premise of Council membership, and they did not show the expected reactions to displays of our military capability. What reactions did they show? They seemed to be studying our weaknesses rather than fearing our strengths. Velthon was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was harder. This is concerning. I am dispatching additional assets to your position. Fleet Commander Zether will join you with a military escort. If these humans prove difficult, we may need to apply standard containment protocols. Standard containment protocols meant military force. Kethral felt sick. High Arbiter, I do not believe that would be wise with this species. Your concern is noted but overruled. You will maintain diplomatic contact while Commander Zether prepares contingency plans. The Council will not allow an aggressive species to develop unchecked at the edge of our territory. The transmission ended. Kethral sat in the darkness of his quarters, thinking about what he had set in motion. 3 weeks passed before the Council fleet arrived. Commander Zethar brought 12 warships, including 2 heavy destroyers capable of orbital bombardment. It was a standard show of force, designed to intimidate primitive species into cooperation. During those 3 weeks, the humans had not been idle. Kethril observed increased activity around their planet. More ships were launched, more defensive satellites were deployed. The humans were preparing for something. "Fleet Commander," Kethril said when Zethar arrived, "I must advise caution. These humans are not like other species we have encountered." Zethar was a large Velkhari with battle scars across his scales. He had led campaigns against 3 different species during his career. He looked at Kethril with something like amusement. "Ambassador, you worry too much. I have reviewed the technical assessments. Human weapons are primitive. Their ships are slow and fragile. If they refuse reasonable terms, we will demonstrate the consequences of such refusal. I believe they are aware of the potential consequences. That is what concerns me." Zethar waved a clawed hand dismissively. "Awareness and capability are different things. Come, let us make contact and resolve this matter." They transmitted to the humans, requesting another meeting. This time, the humans insisted that the meeting take place on neutral ground, aboard a space station that orbited their 4th planet. Kethril agreed, thinking this showed human caution. Zethar agreed because he did not care where the meeting happened. The human delegation this time was larger. Admiral Chen was there, along with Colonel Rivers and Commander Okonkwo. But they were joined by civilians now, government officials with titles like Secretary General and Defense Minister. And there were more soldiers, armed guards who stood at attention around the meeting room. "Ambassador Kethril," the Secretary General said. She was an older human female with gray hair and sharp eyes. "Thank you for agreeing to continue our discussions. I am Amara Akafar, representing the unified government of Earth." Zethar stepped forward before Kethril could respond. "I am Fleet Commander Zethar of the Council Military. I have been sent to ensure these negotiations reach an appropriate conclusion." Secretary General Akafar looked at the fleet commander with the same measuring gaze that all the humans seemed to share. "Welcome, Commander. I hope appropriate means mutually beneficial." "It means whatever the Council decides it means." Zethar did not believe in diplomatic subtlety. "I understand your species has concerns about Council membership. Let me explain your situation clearly. You may join the Council willingly and benefit from our protection and guidance, or you may refuse and face the consequences that all hostile species face. And those consequences are containment, reduction, in extreme cases, elimination." The humans did not react with fear. They did not react at all. Kethril watched Secretary General Akafar's face remain perfectly calm. "Commander," she said, "before we continue, I want to show you something. Admiral Chen, please activate the display." The Admiral touched a control, and the walls of the meeting room became screens. Images appeared, showing human ships, but not the crude vessels Kethril had seen before. These were larger, sleeker, and bristling with weapons that looked different from anything the Velkhari had expected. "3 weeks ago," the Secretary General said, "when Ambassador Kethril shared his historical archive with us, we learned something important. We learned that the galaxy is not a peaceful place. We learned that the Council does not tolerate independence, and we learned that we had been detected." The images shifted, showing production facilities, shipyards, weapons factories. All of them were running at maximum capacity. "Our species has a saying, Commander. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. For the past 80 years, since we first detected anomalous signals that suggested intelligent life beyond our solar system, we have been preparing." Zethar made a dismissive sound. "Preparing for what? Your technology is centuries behind ours." "Is it?" The Secretary General smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. "We had hoped to make peaceful contact with whatever species we encountered. We had hoped that the galaxy would welcome us, but we always knew there was another possibility, so we prepared. The display changed again. This time it showed something that made Zether's scales go pale. Our scientists have been very busy, the Secretary General continued. Reverse engineering captured samples from your initial probe craft, developing theoretical models for faster-than-light travel, and most importantly, studying the tactical implications of the weapons your historical archive so helpfully demonstrated. The image showed a human weapon test. A small missile struck a target in space, and the target disappeared in a flash of energy that Kethril did not recognize. "We call it an antimatter warhead," Admiral Chen said. "We worked out the basic principles decades ago, but we didn't have a practical delivery system until we studied your engine technology. Now we have both." "You could not have developed such weapons in 3 weeks," Zether said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "We didn't develop them in 3 weeks. We've been developing them for 30 years. The past 3 weeks, we've been deploying them." The display shifted one final time. It showed a map of the solar system. Red dots appeared throughout the system, hundreds of them, thousands. "Orbital defense platforms," Colonel Rivers said. His voice was calm, almost casual. "Distributed weapons arrays, mobile strike units. We've been building them in secret since before I was born, waiting to see if we would ever need them." Secretary General Akaffer stood and walked closer to Zether. Despite being smaller than the Velkari commander, she seemed to fill the room with her presence. "Commander, let me explain our position clearly. We do not want war with the Council. We have no interest in conquest or expansion beyond our own system, but we will not be conquered. We will not be contained, and we will certainly not be eliminated." Zether looked at the display, then at the humans, then at Kethril. The ambassador saw something in the commander's eyes that he had never seen before in a Velkari officer. Doubt. "These weapons," Zether said slowly, "if they are real." "They are real, and they are pointed at your fleet right now." The room went very quiet. Kethril could hear his own heart's beating. "Ambassador," the Secretary General said, turning back to Kethril, "we would very much prefer a peaceful relationship with the Council. Trade, cultural exchange, scientific cooperation. But that relationship must be between equals. We will not be vassal species providing soldiers for your wars. We will not accept military oversight of our development. And we will not give up our right to make our own decisions about our own future." Kethril found his voice. "What you are proposing has no precedent in Council history." "Then perhaps it's time to create a new precedent." Zether had recovered some of his composure. "Even if your weapons are as powerful as you claim, you cannot defeat the entire Council fleet. Our forces number in the billions." "We know," Admiral Chen said. "We've been studying your military structure since you were kind enough to share your historical archive. We've identified your supply lines, your command networks, your strategic vulnerabilities. We've developed contingency plans for 17 different invasion scenarios. You've had 3 weeks. We've had 30 years to prepare, 3 weeks to finalize our plans." The Admiral stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with his Secretary General. "Commander, we don't want to fight you. A war between Earth and the Council would cost billions of lives on both sides, but if you force us to fight, we will make that cost so high that your Council will never recover. You would destroy yourselves rather than submit." "Yes," the word was simple and absolute. "That is who we are. We would rather die free than live as slaves." Kethril watched Zether struggle with this concept. The Velkari had never encountered a species willing to face extinction rather than accept Council protection. Their entire strategy depended on species valuing survival above independence. "I need to consult with the Council," Zether said finally. "This situation requires guidance from the High Arbiters." "Of course." Secretary General Akaffer returned to her seat. "Take all the time you need. We'll wait. We're very good at waiting." The Velkari returned to their ships to communicate with the council. Kethril found himself sitting across from Zethar in the commander's quarters, watching the warrior process what had happened. "They called our bluff," Zethar said quietly. "No one has ever done that before. I tried to warn you that these humans were different." "Different?" Zethar made a sound that might have been a laugh. "They sat in that room, knowing I could order their planet destroyed, and they did not show fear. They showed resolve. What will you recommend to the council?" Zethar was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was troubled. "I do not know. Our protocols are designed for species that can be intimidated or conquered. These humans cannot be intimidated, and I do not think they can be conquered without costs that would weaken the council for generations. Then perhaps the Secretary General's proposal deserves consideration." "A relationship between equals," Zethar shook his head. "The council has never had such a relationship. We have always been the most advanced, the most powerful. We have always led. Perhaps that is why we have never considered it, because we never had to." The fleet commander looked at Kethril with something like respect. "You saw this coming, didn't you?" "I saw that these humans were different. I did not know how different until today." The council's response came 2 days later. As Kethril expected, it was not what the humans wanted to hear. High Arbiter Velthon's message was clear. The council did not negotiate with species that threatened its authority. The humans would be given one final chance to accept standard membership terms. If they refused, Fleet Commander Zethar was authorized to begin containment operations. Read the message with a heavy feeling in his chest. He knew what it would mean. War. Destruction on a scale the council had never experienced, and quite possibly the end of the Velkari dominance that had shaped the galaxy for 5,000 cycles. He asked to speak with Zethar before the ultimatum was delivered. "I want to go with you," Kethril said, "when you tell the humans." "Why?" "Because I started this contact. I should see it through." Zethar considered this, then nodded. "Very well. Perhaps your diplomatic skills can find some way to avoid what is coming." They returned to the human station together. The same delegation was waiting, and Kethril noticed that they had not changed their formations or their vigilance. They had been waiting for this answer, and they had already decided what they would do. Zethar delivered the ultimatum. The humans listened without expression. When he finished, Secretary General Akafar looked around the room at her people. Then she stood and walked to the window that looked out at the stars. "Commander," she said without turning around, "Ambassador, I want to tell you a story from our history." Neither Velkari interrupted her. 3,000 years ago, a great empire tried to conquer a small group of city-states in a place called Greece. The empire had millions of soldiers. The Greeks had only thousands. Everyone expected the Greeks to be destroyed. She turned to face them. But the Greeks didn't surrender. At a place called Thermopylae, 300 warriors held a narrow pass against the entire Persian army. They all died, but they died free, and their sacrifice gave the other Greeks time to unite and eventually defeat the empire. Zethar shifted uncomfortably. This is a story of defeat. It's a story of defiance, of people who chose death over submission, and in the end they won. Admiral Chen stood as well. "We have studied every war your council has fought. You always win because your enemies eventually calculate that survival is more important than freedom. That calculation never comes out in your favor against humanity. We will fight you until we can't fight anymore. And if we're going to lose, we'll make sure we take as many of you with us as possible. You would doom your own species out of pride. We would doom our species to remain free. There's a difference." The room was silent. Kethril could feel the weight of history pressing down on this moment. He knew what he should do. He should follow his orders, support Zethar, and watch the Council's forces destroy this defiant species. But he could not. "Commander," Kethril said quietly, "may I speak?" Zethar looked at him with surprise, but nodded. Kethril stepped forward, facing both the humans and his own commander. "I have served the Council my entire life. I have made contact with over 200 species and guided them all toward membership. I have always believed that the Council's way was the right way." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "But I am beginning to wonder if we have been wrong, not about the need for cooperation and mutual defense, but about how we achieve it. Perhaps forcing species into submission is not the only path. Perhaps there is another way." "What are you saying, Ambassador?" Zethar's voice was cold. "I am saying that these humans may be right. A true community cannot be built on fear and domination. It must be built on mutual respect and genuine choice. The Council has never tried this approach because we have never had to, but perhaps it is time to try." "You speak treason." "I speak the truth as I see it. These humans have shown us something important about ourselves. They have shown us that our way is not the only way, and that it may not even be the best way." Secretary General Akafar was watching Kethril with an expression he could not read. "Ambassador, are you proposing what I think you're proposing?" Kethril straightened his shoulders. "I am proposing that we do not deliver this ultimatum. Instead, we return to the Council and recommend a completely new approach. A genuine alliance of free species, where membership is truly voluntary and withdrawal is truly permitted. Where younger species are guided but not controlled. Where the military serves all members equally, not just the Velkhari." Zethar was staring at him with open shock. The Council would never agree to such terms. "Perhaps not immediately, but change begins with someone willing to speak the truth. If not me, then who?" The humans were conferring among themselves. Admiral Chen stepped forward. "Ambassador, if you do this, you'll be putting yourself at great risk. Your own government may punish you." "Yes, they may. But I have spent my life following protocols that were designed to preserve Velkhari dominance, not to create genuine peace. If there is a chance to create something better, I must try." He turned back to Zethar. "Commander, I am asking you to support me. Not because I am certain I am right, but because I am certain the alternative is wrong. A war with these humans will not end the way the Council expects. It will change everything, and not for the better." Zethar was silent for a long time. The future of two civilizations hung on his decision. Finally, the fleet commander spoke. "I have fought in many battles. I have seen species surrender and species resist. I have never seen anyone resist the way these humans do, with such certainty and such preparation." He looked at the humans, then at Kethril. "Perhaps you are right, Ambassador. Perhaps this is the moment when everything changes. I will not deliver the ultimatum. Instead, I will return to the Council and add my voice to yours." The Secretary General let out a breath that suggested she had been holding it for a long time. "Commander, Ambassador, you have our gratitude and our respect." "Do not thank us yet," Zethar said grimly. "The Council may reject our recommendations. They may send another fleet with different orders. Then we'll face that when it comes, but at least we'll have tried for peace first." Admiral Chen offered his hand in the human gesture of agreement. After a moment, Kethril took it. The human's grip was warm and strong. "Ambassador," Chen said, "I think this is the beginning of something important." "So do I, Admiral, so do I." The journey back to the Council's capital world took 3 cycles. Kethril spent most of that time preparing his arguments, reviewing human history, and trying to anticipate the High Arbiter's objections. Zethar, to his credit, did the same. When they finally stood before the Council, the reception was hostile. High Arbiter Velthon looked down at them from his elevated platform with cold anger. "You were ordered to deliver an ultimatum and begin containment operations if necessary. Instead, you return without completing your mission and propose radical changes to 5,000 cycles of policy. Explain yourselves." Kethril stepped forward. "High Arbiter, I have served the Council faithfully for over 300 cycles. In all that time, I have never encountered a species like the humans. They are not what our protocols are designed to handle. All species can be handled. It is a matter of applying sufficient force. Not these species. They have weapons we did not expect, and the will to use them even in the face of their own destruction. They have studied our tactics and developed countermeasures. And most importantly, they have a unity of purpose that I have never seen in a species facing the Council's power." Commander Zethar spoke next. "High Arbiter, I have commanded forces against 3 species that resisted containment. In each case, we won because the enemy valued survival more than victory. The humans do not make that calculation. They will fight until extinction, and they will take as many of us with them as possible." "Are you saying the Council cannot defeat these primitives?" "I am saying the cost of defeating them would be greater than any benefit. Our fleet would be devastated. Our military reputation would be damaged by the length and brutality of the campaign, and other species might see the humans' resistance as an example to follow." This last point clearly struck home. The High Arbiter's eyes narrowed. Kethril continued, "High Arbiter, I have given this matter great thought. I believe the humans offer us an opportunity, not a threat. They have proposed a new kind of relationship, one based on genuine equality and mutual respect. Such an arrangement would be unprecedented, but it might also be beneficial." "Beneficial how?" "The humans are aggressive and creative. Their technology may be primitive, but they developed it at a rate we have never seen in any species. Given time and proper cooperation, they could become valuable allies rather than conquered subjects." "And what would they contribute that our current member species do not?" "Innovation, adaptability, the willingness to challenge assumptions and find new solutions. These are qualities the Council has always lacked because we have never encouraged them in our members." The High Arbiter was silent for a long time. The other arbiters shifted uncomfortably, waiting for his judgment. Finally, Velthon spoke. "Ambassador Kethril, your recommendations are irregular. They challenge the foundation of Council authority. Under normal circumstances, I would dismiss them entirely." Kethril's heart sank. "However," the High Arbiter continued, "the information you have provided about human capabilities is concerning. If your assessment is accurate, the Council cannot afford a prolonged conflict at this time. We face challenges on other fronts that require our full attention." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, less angry, more thoughtful. "I propose a trial period. We will establish diplomatic relations with the humans under the terms they have requested. They will remain independent, but they will also be isolated from other species until we can properly assess the implications. If this arrangement proves successful, we will consider making it permanent. If it proves dangerous, we will reassess." It was not everything Kethril had hoped for, but it was more than he had expected. He bowed deeply. "Thank you, High Arbiter. I believe this decision will benefit both the Council and humanity." "We shall see, Ambassador, we shall see." The news was transmitted to Earth within hours. The human response was cautious but positive. Secretary-General Akafar proposed a formal treaty ceremony to mark the new relationship, and the Council agreed. 6 months later, Kethril stood in a great hall on the human home world, watching representatives of 2 civilizations sign an agreement that had never existed before. The Treaty of Washington, the humans called it, named after a famous leader from their history who had helped create their first unified government. The treaty established humanity as an independent partner of the Council, not a subject species. Trade would be conducted on equal terms. Technology would be shared with appropriate safeguards. And most importantly, humanity would never be required to provide soldiers for Council wars unless they chose to do so. In exchange, humanity agreed to limit their expansion to certain regions of the galaxy and to give the Council advance notice of any major technological developments. They also agreed to serve as mediators in disputes between the Council and other species, using their unique perspective as outsiders. It was an imperfect arrangement, full of compromises and potential conflicts, but it was also something new, something that had never existed before in galactic history. After the ceremony, Admiral Chen found Kethril standing by a window, looking out at the human city that stretched to the horizon. "Ambassador," Chen said, "I wanted to thank you personally. You took a great risk for us." "I took a great risk for everyone, including my own people." "What do you think will happen now?" Kethril considered the question carefully. "I think everything will change. Not immediately, not completely, but the seed has been planted. Other species will see what humanity has achieved. They will begin to wonder if they, too, might achieve something similar." "The Council won't like that." "No, but change does not require permission. It only requires courage and persistence." He turned to face the human. "Your species has both of those qualities in abundance." Chen smiled. "So do you, Ambassador. It takes courage to challenge everything you've been taught. It takes more courage to face an empire with honesty than with weapons. You showed us that." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the human city. Somewhere above them, ships from two civilizations orbited together, the beginning of something that might grow into genuine cooperation. Kethril knew the road ahead would be difficult. The Council would resist change at every step. Other species would test the new boundaries, and the humans themselves were unpredictable, capable of both great nobility and great foolishness. But for the first time in his long career, Kethril felt something he had never felt before. Hope. Not hope that the old ways would continue, but hope that something better was possible. The first contact protocols were already being revised. New sections were being added about species that could not be intimidated or conquered. New approaches were being developed for dealing with civilizations that demanded equality rather than submission. And at the center of all these changes was a simple truth that the humans had demonstrated: that free peoples, fighting for what they believed in, could change the course of history. Ambassador Kethril returned to his duties with renewed purpose. There were other species out there, other civilizations that had been contained or conquered over the millennia. Perhaps some of them could be freed. Perhaps some of them could be given the chance to choose their own destiny. It would take time. It would take patience. It would take the kind of stubborn determination that the humans had shown. But as Kethril had learned, humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy was not their weapons or their technology. It was the idea that freedom was worth fighting for, even against impossible odds. That idea, once planted, would be very hard to contain. And the galaxy would never be the same.